Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive, who is always a tonic and always a sage. Lieutenant Colonel, very good to see you again. We're almost as far apart in the world as it's possible to be. I'm on the banks of the Moscow River, where everything looks different. How does it look from the Potomac? Is Donald Trump seriously convincing anyone that the Epstein affair is something we should all just move on from, and we should all look over there in the Persian Gulf where he is acting tough? What's your take on all that?
Yeah, I'm not sure either one of those are good. To your first question, no, he's not convincing anyone that they should look anywhere, Persian Gulf or otherwise, away from the Epstein files. You have an interesting dynamic. You have those who were just absolutely, dyed in the wool, going to support President Trump. I mean, you remember he famously said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and they would still support me in 2015 when he was running. And that's probably true. And I think that that's playing itself out right now, and it has been for the first 12 and a half months or so of his term here. And even when you see all of these accusations and all these claims left and right, this core of people will defend him to the end. And you see certainly all those that he intentionally surrounded himself with inside the administration are going to bat big time and saying, yeah, don't look here, don't look here. There's no problem with that. Todd Blanche, his personal attorney, is the guy who's in charge of this. And he's saying, yeah, nobody's going to be prosecuted. We're just going to move on. So it really is going to the legislature, because that is literally the only other alternative to get any justice in the United States through the impeachment process. That's the only thing we have, and you're almost certainly not going to get it now while there's still the Republicans in charge of both the House and the Senate. But golly, you got to just be honest and say, look, man, President Trump is doing so many things right now, both domestically and internationally, to just make sure that he's going to have a big blue wave come in. And I'll tell you, the issue has been that the likelihood is that the House would go to the Democrats in the midterm elections, but that the Senate was a toss-up. But if you keep going down the path you're in and telling everybody that the economy is getting better when they can see with their own eyes and their own pocketbooks that it's not, and then when they see all these things with the files, the Epstein files, and they see all the things that are in there, and forget about what's been blocked out, forget about what hadn't even been released yet, but what has been released is just egregious. And then you're telling me that nobody is going to be held account for that? I mean, not even Trump for the moment, but nobody. And that's just enraging a lot of Americans. And the only recourse that's left is through an impeachment process. And President Trump himself is laying the ground, because nobody is convinced by his admonition to just look elsewhere. Let's move on to something else. No, everybody wants to get this done. That's one of the reasons why he was elected, because so many of his supporters wanted to see justice done to these poor women. And they're not going to be placated. There's this core that's going to hold on to him no matter what. But that core is leaking. It's bleeding supporters, because they say, no, this is too far even for the true believers. So I don't think this is going to play out well, and I don't think anybody's just going to be willing to look elsewhere.
And therein lies the danger, am I right, Lieutenant Colonel, that, they made a whole movie called Wag the Dog about a president in trouble, trying to get people to focus on something else by a fictional war. In this case, perhaps a real one. The American hardware is all in place. The naval power has been there for a couple of weeks, it seems, but the air power is now flooding into the area. I saw, I think it was an F-22 was pulled out of an air show an hour's notice because it was needed operationally. The tankers, the tanker planes are all headed to the Gulf. Now, this could all be Trump's braggadocio, his art of the deal and all that, in which case I think he's met his match in the Ayatollah. The Ayatollah is a very old man, a very religious man, who almost certainly believes he's going to meet God when he passes away and spend the rest of eternity with God, not easily frightened or intimidated, in other words. But if Trump is not bluffing, it's a bit like Harry Callaghan in Dirty Harry. Do you feel lucky, punk? Clint Eastwood famously asked. Should Donald Trump have fired 5 or only 6 shots or only 5? These are the questions that we are all asking ourselves. Is he bluffing, or is he really going to create the mother of all wars?
You know, I'll tell you, Mr. Galloway, that there's an interesting dynamic here. On the one hand, you can say, well, maybe President Trump is doing a wag the dog kind of situation, and he wants to distract people. Some people thought that was the case with the Maduro issue, and I guess that didn't play out very long, so they had to find another one. I tend to not think that's the case here. There are other things you can do to distract, but this one is weird because President Trump himself seems to be the one who's trying to find a diplomatic way out of this, and he is surrounded by so many people in his cabinet and people who are in his support. Normally, are big advocates of what he wants to do, like Lindsey Graham, Jack Keane, Mike Pompeo, Rebecca Grant, Victoria Coates, all kinds of people, and the list could continue going on, are advocating no diplomacy. They say, Mr. President, do not negotiate. If you succeed in negotiations, you'll be like Obama. They're using that Obama card to try and pressure and cajole President Trump to launch this operation. There are people on our side of the pond here that are just myopic and just bloodthirsty, lusting for war with Iran. They wanted it for a long time, and many of them view this is our best chance ever. We've got to take this chance diplomatically, politically, militarily. We'll never have a better situation right now, so they think to launch this attack. And listen, you can launch the attack. There's a lot of combat power, as you just mentioned. There's a lot of combat power. There is not a fraction enough combat power to win a war. And a regime change operation of the time they're talking about is something like what you would need in the 2003 Iraq War, a country that's about a third of the size, and a missile force that was almost non-existent. It was a lot easier of a program, and we had about 300,000 ground troops. This one, we are deploying no ground troops. We're hoping that a lot of air power will get it done. And historically and militarily, I can't make a plot that only by the sheerest of luck would you possibly conduct a regime change operations with so little combat power and none on the ground. And yet these people are willing to just roll the dice and say, yeah, do it. Let's just hope that it's going to work. Let's hope our air defense is enough to protect us. Let's hope that it's going to work this time for Israel when it didn't in 2025. And let's hope that our offensive is enough, that we have enough missiles and can sustain long enough to actually get the regime out, to knock out their offensive military missile capability, and prevent their proxies in the region from actually making good on their threats of trying to start fires all over the Middle East. It is a gamble of the highest order, and one which has nearly no chance of success. And I'm just puzzled why they're so willing to put America's credibility and economic stability on the line. But that's what they're trying to do. And right now, the weird thing is, it may be Trump himself who's the best bulwark against this foolish decision.
Well, you described that situation brilliantly, and let me supplement it with this. The Iraq that they did destroy, how did that turn out? The complete absence of any kind of credible explanation of what Iran would look like, even if they were successful in the wake of a war unleashed by the United States, is staring me in the face. I happen to know well what happened after they destroyed Arab power in Iraq. It led to a massive inflation of Persian power in the Gulf. It led to ISIS. It led to Al-Qaeda. It led to hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties. It led to cascading terrorism around the world. It led to a succession of new wars thereafter. And no one had thought through, they even admit it now, no one had thought through what would happen in Iraq after they succeeded in breaking the Ba'athist regime, sending the army and the police home. What are they going to do in Iran, even if they were able to regime change it, which, like you, I have very grave doubts that they will be able to.
But here's this gets even more weird, honestly, because everybody knows the aftermath of the 2003 Iraq War. It was common wisdom and knowledge that people acknowledged and recognized that we didn't have a plan for what came next. We had a hope that, whether it was the Vice President Dick Cheney or Don Rumsfeld that thought we were going to be received with, as liberators and flowers and all that kind of nonsense. That was like the hope that they hoped that it would work out that way. So then they could, and by the way, there's a lot of evidence that there was a plan even then to quickly pivot over to Iran. That blew up in our face because we didn't think through enough the possibilities of plan B or plan C or D and what would happen if the best plan didn't happen. This case is crazy because it was about a week or so ago, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was testifying before Congress, ostensibly on the Venezuela issue. But while they had him there, one of the senators asked him, by the way, if this regime change thing even works, what is the plan for a post-Ayatollah government? And he said, I swear to God, it's out there. Anybody can Google it. He said, I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen if they fall. And I said, you got to be kidding me. He's not even trying to hide it by saying, yeah, we're trying to have a regime change operation. According to many of the people who are advising President Trump, you want to destroy the Ayatollah. You want to destroy their government. And you don't even know what comes next, meaning there is no plan for what. And then the only thing is left is all of that wreckage you just described about chaos in the region and all kinds of second and third order effects negative that would happen to us, even if they succeeded, but probably we wouldn't. So this has every possibility of going sideways. And it's just, I don't even see a theoretical possibility of something ending up good for the Western world.
No, and if I may, one other supplement, that the economic devastation will be so considerable, it'll be like an economic nuclear winter for us in Europe, that's for sure. You in the United States, consequently, almost certain. But the closure of the straits, the destruction of the oil and gas facilities in the neighboring Arab countries, the ones that like to give jewelry and airplanes and gold bars to Donald Trump will almost certainly cease to exist. Their economies definitely will cease to exist because, trust me on this, Lieutenant Colonel, if the Ayatollahs are going down, they're going down with all guns blazing. For them, this is a quick ticket to heaven. These people believe in heaven. They believe that someone dying, fighting the great Satan is guaranteed a ticket to heaven. So they are going down, if they go down, with all guns blazing. I feel sure that Western leaders have hopelessly underestimated the economic carnage that will result. What say you?
Yeah, I don't think they even consider the right now the arrogance and the hubris in the Western world in general, and you can certainly add all of Europe into this, especially related to the Russia-Ukraine war. But in the United States in particular, on both the Russia-Ukraine war and this one, is just off the charts because we think everything will go our way. Nothing the other side tries will succeed, and that we'll end up in a good place, even with no plan to get there. But we just think because we're America, we will. What happened in Venezuela could turn out to be one of the worst things imaginable for us because it succeeded so well. Trump may now come to believe that these advisors that told him they could go in there and take out Maduro at low cost were right. And he thinks, okay, well, if they're right on that one, then they'll be right on this one. And I could tell you 100 reasons why militarily, diplomatically, and culturally, the two things are not even comparable, but not to Trump's eyes. They may be, it's just a military thing. It's a country, so it's the same. And if he believes what he's being told here, he may make a catastrophic decision. But I'll tell you, at the top of that, Trump is real good at media. He's real good at spinning things. He's real good at claiming whatever, as long as everything is on top and no one challenges him. But if there's an actual crisis, he does not have the capacity to actually lead in a crisis where you have to make tough decisions and right decisions. And I fear that it will just engulf him and he just will wither on the vine because he won't know what to do. And his actions will try to make these things work like they did before with spin, but when reality starts crushing in on you, it doesn't care about spin. And that's the thing that I worry about, is if some of your concerns prove to be right, if the Iranians act the way you think they do, and that they won't go down without all guns blazing, if we start to fire, and then they may discover that they don't go down, these launches, these missiles they have actually start to have some effect, and they can wither these fires. And I don't know that we can, politically or domestically.
Well, I wouldn't want to be on the USS Eisenhower if the rockets start flying, as we've discussed before, Lieutenant Colonel. But lastly, as I'm in Moscow, and as you mentioned, the Ukraine war, on that track at least, if judged by activity, things are moving and presumably moving forward. Now, there's about to be another trilateral meeting. There was one in the UAE, and there's another one in the next day or two in Miami. What's your reading on how the process on the Ukraine track is going?
Well, I mean, you still have people that are just disconnected from reality. You had Mark Rutte a week ago Monday in Kiev making all kinds of claims about coalition of the willing and French and British troops that are going to be on the ground there, and all these security guarantees that are coming, and we're not going to abandon you. Just totally disconnected from reality. Meanwhile, he was there when most of the capital was in the ice box and within the dark, because there wasn't electricity, because Russia's knocking out a lot of their electricity and their energy capacity, and then they're continuing to move forward on the front, while the Ukraine military continues to shrink because it doesn't have enough troops. It's having AWOL folks, and it can't recruit enough, whereas Russia has no problem with any of those categories. So on the military front, things are continuing to move in Russia's favor. And Russia's saying, hey, we'll continue to talk. We'll have these trilateral meetings, but none of our terms have changed since June of 2024. They're all still on the table. We'll get them all, and that means demilitarization and denazification, not just the territory, or they'll just keep fighting until they take it all, everything they want. And it'll be a lot more than the terms that are on the table. And the longer we go to not understand that and not accept the reality, as painful and ugly as it would be, then the more likelihood that Russia gets even more. So you mentioned that foreign policy article. It says, Europe may be starting to pivot a little bit to Putin. That's a long time in coming. I'm glad of it, and I hope that they actually come to that conclusion. But, I mean, coming just a week after Rutte made those statements, you got to wonder, is it Jekyll and Hyde kind of situation? Do they mean it? I don't know. Is truth and reality finally imposing itself, and they realize that? I don't know. I have heard, I'll just tell you from a couple of different sources, that President Trump has given a private, basically an ultimatum to Zelensky, and says either you do something. One source said by May or March, and another one said by June, one or the other, that the time is running out. So you're either going to come to a negotiation on the whatever terms we accept, or we're out of here. I don't know if President Trump means that. He's kind of said that before and he didn't do it. But, I mean, it's long overdue. But it doesn't matter whether he does or whether he doesn't. Russia has won this war. Ukraine has lost it. And the only thing we have to wait to find out now is how big the loss is going to be.